Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come. I once heard it said.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes below. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to Buenos Aires in Argentina and Lima in Peru. After a pleasant 2-hour flight, we arrived in Buenos Aires. Our hotel room was next to the main road, so there was a lot of traffic noise. We were too early to check in, so we dropped off our luggage and went looking for somewhere to eat, and were struck by how dirty the streets were. During the day, the pavement started filling up with black rubbish sacks, and at night, people scavenged through the sacks. When they had taken what they wanted, they left the sacks open, turning the whole area into dog and cat heaven. At 4 a.m. every morning the streets filled with trucks making a lot of noise while they collected the rubbish, and by 8 a.m. the streets were reasonably clean again. The air conditioning unit in our room had 2 settings, Antarctic or off. The hotel claimed to have internet access, which turned out to be one computer in a broom cupboard costing $10 for 20 minutes. But there was a good internet cafe nearby, so that wasn't a problem. Next morning we had a pleasant shopping spree, as everything was so cheap, and in the afternoon we took a long walk to the marina area where there were lots of cafes and a few small yachts. My stomach was still not back to normal, so I was watching what I ate, but I couldn't resist an ice cream from the famous chain called Fredo. The ice cream was fantastic, but it lay on my stomach like a pile of cannonballs. By 10:30 at night I was still not hungry, when a man standing at the door of a restaurant talked us into going in and paying for an expensive tango show, which included a 3-course dinner. I forced myself to eat a fraction of the 15-kilo steak and had to leave the rest. The show was fantastic. During my many years as a professional musician, I played tangos on thousands of occasions, but this was the first time I had heard them played by an authentic tango band. There were only 4 musicians in the band, which had a weird lineup of piano, double bass, violin, and bandoneon, a type of accordion. And unlike the simple tangos I was accustomed to, they had complex rhythms. The dancers and singers were amazing, and it was an excellent night, although at £36 a head, quite expensive compared to the general cost of eating out. I was surprised that by lunchtime the next day I was still not hungry, and ever since eating the ice cream the day before, the thought of food made me feel nauseous. It was not like me at all, as after a hearty breakfast I am usually hungry by mid-morning coffee. I was also starting to get some pains in my stomach, so I was half expecting another stomach upset. That evening we were on our way to eat, despite me still not being hungry, when I suddenly and unexpectedly did a gigantic fart, and after recovering from the shock, I discovered I was hungry. So all the discomfort must have been caused by trapped wind, though I found it hard to believe it was caused by ice cream. Next morning we met up with Federika's cousin Katia. She and her husband had to emigrate to Buenos Aires from Croatia in the 50s, when her husband, a journalist, criticized Tito's communist government and had to leave in a hurry. It was an emotional meeting, as they hadn't seen each other since Federika was 10 years old. It was also good for me, as, after a respectable amount of time chatting over coffee, I was able to politely take my leave and go back to the hotel for a nap while they went shopping. That afternoon we went to an area called La Boca. It used to be a very poor part of town with a small dockyard, but was now a thriving and colourful tourist area. Many years earlier, there was lots of different coloured paint left over from a ship refurbishment, and the dockyard owners gave the paint to the people of the area whose houses were very run down. So the unique character of the area was not so much a result of planning, but of whatever coloured paint happened to be available at the time. Word soon got around and people came from all over to visit. When the locals noticed an influx of visitors, they started opening bars and putting on tango displays in the street until it became one of the liveliest places in Argentina. Nearly every other bar had a couple dancing tango, which you could either sit and watch for the price of a beer or watch from the street for a small donation. It just goes to show how small decisions we make can sometimes have enormous consequences. A man sitting in an office decided to give some paint away and probably thought no more about it. I hope he lived long enough to see the benefit his small act of kindness gave to so many people. The dockyard was still there, but it was very run down and smelly. There was an area with what should have been seawater but looked like a large diesel pit with lots of junk floating around in it. Around the side were derelict cranes looking very sorry for themselves. Permanently moored at the port was a large yacht named Nicholas Mihanovic, who started a shipping line in the mid-1880s. In recent years, the boat had been used as an art and crafts centre, but was now a centre for floating rust, although I doubted it would float for much longer. It was surprising that with the success of La Boca and the money going into the area, that they should leave the dock area in such a state. We spent one day walking around the markets. One was a kind of antique market with lots of old interesting stuff at silly prices, silly high, not silly low. We knew it was horribly touristy, but we couldn't resist having our photo taken wearing very posh clothes of the late 19th century, with me wearing a top hat and carrying a cane for whacking any riffraff that came too close. Federika wore a beautiful outfit with an elaborate umbrella. There were no backs to the outfits, so we stepped into them, but it was surprising how authentic they looked. Then we went to a market with arts, crafts and clothes, which was much more interesting. It was in a large park where youngsters met and pursued their many interests, not touting for money, just purely for the joy of it. There was one group doing tightrope walking with 3 ropes strung around trees. Another group was juggling, another was singing and playing drums, and another was doing some amazing acrobatics. Everyone looked so happy. The Immigration Museum was fascinating. It was housed in a huge warehouse where immigrants were taken and fed when they first arrived in Argentina, and you could almost feel their presence in what was once the dining room. The museum kept a record of every person arriving in Argentina, and a man sat at a computer offering to look up names for those researching their family trees. In our case, we were interested in finding out about Federika's grandfather Costo and his brother Federico, which comes with a very interesting story. In 1850, they left the small island of Šipan near Dubrovnik in Croatia, where life was very hard. Like so many immigrants, they arrived with just the clothes they were wearing. Costo stayed in Argentina and Federico went to Chile. Costo was a tough, hard-working man who soon saved enough to buy a moderately successful inn and branched out into other businesses which also did well. He married an Argentinian woman called Isabella Brignon, who was from a wealthy family, and they lived in Buenos Aires. They had 3 children and a good life, but Costo was homesick, so he persuaded Isabel to move to Šipan. It was a massive culture shock to leave one of the most exciting cities in the world to a tiny island with virtually no amenities. So it wasn't long before she informed him that she was going back to Buenos Aires with the children, and he appeared to accept it. When the day arrived, Costo rowed Isabel and the children out to the ship that was taking her home and passed up the first 2 children, but then turned around and rowed back to shore, keeping their son, Tomo. Isabel was distraught, but the ship's captain refused to get involved in a family dispute and continued to sail to Argentina. Tomo was Federika's grandfather, and the story gets even more interesting from there, but it is one for another day. We were excited to find out more about Federika's great-grandfather, but many years earlier there had been a big fire which destroyed all the records of that period. There was, however, a record of Federika's great-grandmother Isabel returning to Buenos Aires from Croatia. It was still very interesting walking around the building with its exhibits and photos of the many immigrants who landed to start new lives in a land of such great opportunity.
Oh, don't look back, the tolling bell will never crack. Whether your time is short or long, in just a few seconds, you'll be gone.
We checked out of our hotel with a few hours to kill before leaving for the airport, so we left our luggage at reception. We had done it many times before, but this time someone stole a bottle of perfume and Federika's mobile phone, which we didn't discover until reaching our destination. I hadn't locked them, as naively it had never occurred to me that an employee of the hotel would go through luggage and steal stuff, but I wouldn't make that mistake again. It was a 5-hour flight from Buenos Aires to Lima, and with a 2-hour time difference, it meant we didn't get to bed until 2 a.m., so we were both shattered. A friend had found us a nice little apartment for our 2-month stay for only £60 a week. Although we intended to travel a lot in Peru, at that price, it was worth keeping the apartment for the whole time, so we had a base to travel from. It was a strange setup, as although it was an apartment, they serviced it as if it were a hotel room and even brought breakfast to our room every morning. It was only coffee, toast and jam, but that was perfectly adequate, and we supplemented it with some yogurt and granola from the supermarket. There was also a computer with an internet connection in the lobby, which was free to use and seemed to be available most of the time, as most people lived in the building and had computers in their rooms. The apartment was in a good district, within walking distance of a busy shopping area with a supermarket, cafes, and a large multi-screen cinema. It was great to be able to walk to the cinema, and we went 3 times in our first week. The films were always in their original language with Spanish subtitles. We were also opposite a huge ancient Inca burial site called Huaca Pusillana, so we didn't have far to go to visit some ruins, and there was certainly no shortage of ghosts. So, after 18 years of being with Federika and constantly hearing about Peru, I was finally seeing it for myself and was certainly very impressed. Everything was so cheap, and to get around, all we had to do was stand on a street corner and wait a few seconds for a taxi to come along. There were no clocks in the taxis, so we had to agree on a price beforehand, and on one occasion managed to get a 25-minute ride to the sea for just 68p, although it was the tattiest car I had ever been in. Even cheaper were the thousands of colectivos, which were small, privately run minibuses. There were no bus stops. We just put our hand out and never waited more than a few seconds for one to stop. The cost for that was 17p to go anywhere within the inner city zone. Eating out was also very cheap. For lunch, we could get a 2-course menu for £1.70, and the quality wasn't bad. One day, we splashed out and ate at an excellent restaurant by the sea. We ordered a lonce, which in theory was afternoon tea and sandwiches, but in practice we had it at 8 p.m. It included a cocktail, main course, soft drink, and dessert for £4 each. One thing that struck me was the amount of security everywhere. Our area was patrolled by a private security company, and on most side streets they had watchmen. This was a man in a hut that was just about big enough for him to sit, and it was his job to look out for anything suspicious. There were also heavily armed policemen in main areas, as well as private patrols of men on scooters fitted with blue flashing lights. In restaurants, Chairs or tables were fitted with chains so that women could secure their handbags to avoid them being snatched. We had to be careful when travelling in a car not to leave anything in view, otherwise someone might smash the car window and grab it. This happened to Federika's aunt, who had a necklace ripped from her neck while waiting at traffic lights. Most buildings had fences with locked gates around them, and we were not allowed through unless the security guard pressed a buzzer to let us in. A lot of shops were situated in offices behind security gates. I didn't know what to make of it all. Should I have felt safe because there was so much security, or not safe because of the need to have so much security? I can't say I ever felt threatened. You didn't need to be a meteorologist to predict the weather in Lima, as it was always the same. Thick cloud early in the morning, which cleared up by 10 a.m. every day. Hot until 5 p.m., when suddenly it cooled down and was dark by 7 p.m., with only half an hour's difference between a summer and a winter sunset. In winter, the morning cloud didn't clear, so it stayed cool most of the day, but it was never cold. There was never any rain, but it was damp most of the time. On the first day, we went to the local supermarket, Wong's, to stock up on bits and pieces. It was a huge supermarket and one of a chain all over Peru. I was amazed when Federika told me that it all started with a small corner shop just a few blocks from her house, and she used to go to school with the son of the founder. There was a vast selection of food and an area for takeaways. Unlike most supermarkets that were simply buildings with the sole purpose of selling, the Wong store was designed beautifully with tiled arches which divided sections. There was also a fountain and balconies, which made it feel like we were outside. There was a cafe with chairs around the fountain, and sometimes there was even someone playing a grand piano. There were workers everywhere and all eager to help. They had won many awards for the way they treated their staff, and it showed. It was a real breath of fresh air, although they had just sold the chain to a Chilean company, so who knows what it would be like in the future. One day, we went for a walk to see Federika's old house, and she showed me where the original Wong corner store was. It was a tiny unit, but they expanded it until they owned the entire block. We saw a dog which had no fur, so from behind it looked like a weird, skinny pig. The breed came from the north of Peru, where they were officially known as Peruvian Inca orchid dogs, and were found mainly in the homes of the Inca nobility. I thought it was quite ugly, but I suppose it was the perfect choice for someone with an allergy to dog hair. Our local shopping area was on a large roundabout with 5 exits, each filled with 3 lanes of speeding cars. The official policy was to pretend that pedestrians didn't exist, so there was no need to waste money on traffic lights or pedestrian crossings. That might work when there is a culture of giving way to pedestrians, but if anything, drivers seemed to speed up when they saw us. Lima had an interesting system for currency exchange. Banks used to charge extortionate rates to change money, so money changers appeared on most street corners offering a much lower rate, even though it was very much against the law. The police got fed up chasing them, so they made it legal as long as the person changing the money had a license. Money changers were everywhere and easily recognizable by their distinctive jackets and the waving around of big wads of cash. They usually stood near banks, which had an armed security guard standing outside. I assumed that if one of the money changers was robbed, the security guard would have to do something. Ironically, it meant that banks were paying towards the protection of their competitors, or maybe the money changers paid the guards something on the side, which was not an uncommon way of doing business in Peru. I met many of Federika's friends. Bobby's son was an officer in the Navy, so we spent one Sunday at the Naval Club, which had a swimming pool and an excellent lunch buffet. It was enjoyable, but being Sunday, it was full of kids, and although the pool was very large, it was difficult to swim more than a few meters without being the victim of a screaming dive bomb. After lunch, I was looking forward to my customary siesta, but the only place I could lie down was on the grass, which was fully occupied by biting ants, so it wasn't my most relaxing nap ever. One morning we visited the town centre, starting with the presidential palace, which was heaving with heavily armed soldiers and armoured vehicles. There was a large grass area in the middle where lots of people appeared to be waiting for something. In front of the palace was a row of riot police holding shields and batons, looking like they were protecting the palace. Federika asked a policeman what was going on, and he told us that the president was going to make an appearance shortly. While we were waiting, a large group of protesters appeared from nowhere, and when the gates were opened for them, they marched into the palace grounds. They were Colombians protesting about people who had been taken hostage in Colombia many years earlier and were still captive. The Peruvian president was on their side and trying to get the hostages freed. He made an appearance and waved to the protesters for a few minutes before going back inside. It was very dramatic and a bit scary with all that heavy firepower in place, but it passed peacefully. While this was happening, there was a military band trying to play the theme tune to Hawaii 5-0, which seemed a weird choice of music. They continued to play during the changing of the guard, which involved 2 guards coming from side doors on each side of the palace and marching towards the front door in the middle. The march looked like something out of Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks sketch, with the guards raising their legs slowly to a horizontal position and then lowering them slowly, whilst keeping their legs rigidly straight. Next, we visited the cathedral, where Federika tagged along with a group of Spanish-speaking people and their tour guide, so I had to amuse myself for a while. I strolled around a pretty gory section, which contained an extensive collection of skeletons. Finally, we went to the Franciscan monastery, which was not really my thing, but Federika enjoyed it. It got a bit more interesting when we walked through the catacombs, where there were 30,000 people buried, and there were another 2 levels with a similar amount. They had collected all the skulls and bones and made nice circular patterns, so there was a row of skulls and a row of femurs, then various assorted bones, and then another row of skulls, and so on. It was certainly artistic, but I couldn't make up my mind if it was in bad taste or not. They might as well have hung all the skulls from the ceiling and run a ghost train through them.
The Jabberwock's in town tonight. You better watch out and know how to fight. He'll gyre and gimble, claw and bite, snatch your band from out of sight. Stop your nonsense, back to work, or I'll tie you up in a very straight shirt. This looking glass ain't what it seems. It's nothing more than a mad hatter's dream.
As we explored deeper underground, I was a little too conscious of the possibility of an earthquake, which Peru was famous for. At one point, I looked down into a deep, wide well, which claimed to be the safest place in Lima during an earthquake. It contained 30 meters of skulls, and in the event of an earthquake, the idea was to jump into the well, and the skulls would break my fall. Thank you very much, but if it came to that, I would take my chances with the stairs. One night, we were invited to dinner at one of the best restaurants in Lima by some friends of Federika, Jorge, and Maruja, and I was surprised when we were picked up in a big BMW. The chauffeur was Jorge's armed bodyguard, who was an ex-policeman. Jorge had been kidnapped a few years earlier and had been lucky to be released after paying the ransom, so he was not taking any more chances. The restaurant was at the end of a small pier and was very plush. The food was superb, but to my horror, I discovered that it was not the custom in Peru to drink wine with a meal, and our hosts both drank Coca-Cola. I knew they would be only too happy to order wine for us, but as it was awkward to ask outright, I had to rely on my vast experience of hint-dropping. It took a while, but when Jorge got the message, he ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. They did have vineyards in Peru, but they were mainly used for producing sweet wines and pisco, which is the Peruvian equivalent of tequila. We were invited to a beach club by Nevan and his mother Dora, who were good friends of Federika's family and part of the Croatian community in Peru. It was 80 miles south of Lima. In theory, all Peruvian beaches were supposed to be free and available to the public, but in practice, a lot of the coast was scattered with clubs where you had to be a member to use the road leading to the beach. Nevans Club had a choice of 3 beaches, and we chose the smallest one, which we had all to ourselves. There was plenty of staff around, so it was well maintained with changing rooms, showers, sun lounges and sunshades. The Peruvian sun was so strong that it went straight through canvas sunshades, so we had a good old palm leaf shade, which gave much more protection. The sea was quite cold and the waves were big, so we had to be careful, but as the beach was in a bay, swimming wasn't too difficult. The sea in that area was unpolluted by sewage and nasty chemicals, but there was a lot of rubbish floating around. I was also put off by a small jellyfish floating past, so I had to keep an eye out for its big brothers. It wasn't until after I got out of the sea that I saw a member of staff carrying a jellyfish the size of a large dinner plate. So that was the end of my swimming on that beach. Indulging in my favourite sport of lying on a sunbed, I was pleasantly surprised at the amount of wildlife around. There were lots of pelicans which flew gracefully from place to place for no apparent reason. Some sat on the sea and surface dived to catch fish, while others seemed happy just chilling out on the rocks. Hundreds of patillas flew around until they saw a fish, and then dive-bombed at top speed to catch them. I found it fascinating and sat there for ages watching them. At one point, there must have been a big shoal of fish swimming past, because the sky was alive with birds dive-bombing, and the splashing made the water look like it was boiling. Refusing to let stupid jellyfish spoil my day, I walked into the sea with Neven when he scooped up a handful of sand from the seabed and showed me some disgusting little creepy crawlies called mui that look a bit like woodlice. The sand was very soft, so when I put my feet down, I could feel the mui crawling around my toes like I was standing in a bath full of cockroaches. It was like something out of a horror movie, but easily avoidable by not putting my feet down. We saw a local man collecting crabs from the rocks, so Neven bought 4 red crabs from him and asked the chef of the restaurant to cook them for our lunch. The restaurant was happy to oblige, but as they didn't usually serve crabs, they didn't have nutcrackers to crack the tough shells. The only solution was to bash them with empty beer bottles, which was surprisingly effective, although it did draw concerned looks from fellow diners who were afraid we might be football hooligans. At the end of a very pleasant day, Neven drove us the 4 miles to Jorge and Maruja's beach house, where we planned to spend the next few days. The house was in an exclusive private club and was one of the few that were at beach level. It had 5 bedrooms and plenty of bathrooms. They had also invited 3 other friends to play cards with them, and I had never seen anyone play cards for so long. The first day, they started around 5 p.m. and finished at 4 a.m. The next day, they started at 10 a.m. and finished around 10 p.m. with a short break for lunch, and even then, Maruja had to force them to stop playing cards so we could all eat. Federika and I spent most of the time on the beach and went for a few walks, although we didn't get very far as the rocks on either side came to a dead end. The sea was much rougher than the previous beach, so rather than swim, we just stood in the sea with survival being our main pursuit. Even when I saw a wave coming and prepared myself for battle, it was still a struggle not to get tossed around. My usual technique for dealing with big waves was to dive into them, but these waves were intent on flipping me over. One wave hit Federika so hard that her back was sore for a couple of days. There were also some strong currents, but as they went from side to side, there was no danger of being dragged out to sea. There were a lot of surfers around, and heaven knows how they managed to survive, as they were constantly being thrown violently off their boards. During one of our walks, I was thrilled to see some dolphins. They often swam playfully with the surfers, and were even known to help those who got into trouble by pushing them towards the shore. 2 maids were employed at the beach house to cook, clean, and do whatever else was needed. The house came with its own beach area, and every morning one of the maids took chairs, sunshades, and a cooler box full of drinks and snacks. The local beach restaurant offered beach waitress service, and they walked around all day taking orders and serving us where we sat. That was my kind of beach. We really enjoyed our stay at the beach house, which was nicely finished off with a magnificent restaurant breakfast before Jorge's driver took us back to Lima. It was a horrific drive as he drove at 100 miles per hour on roads with a 50 miles per hour speed limit, and he weaved in and out of lanes like he was playing a video game. At one point he was contemplating overtaking a lorry on the hard shoulder, a dirt road, at high speed, but thankfully he chickened out at the last minute. There was no doubt that he handled the car well, but everyone makes mistakes, which at that speed would have meant curtains for everyone. Jorge's brother was killed in a car crash on that same road a few years earlier, so I was surprised he condoned this kind of driving. And Maruja later told us she refused to get in a car with him driving. Back in Lima, we visited the huaca across the road from us. Huacas are ancient burial and ceremonial sites that are scattered all over Peru. Federica enjoyed the visit, but my interest was challenged. If you've seen one crumbling brick, you've seen them all. Although I must admit, the sheer quantity of clay bricks was pretty impressive. I had always thought it strange that throughout history, the priority for so many cultures was to build houses for the dead rather than the living. It was a huge site, but still only a sixth of its original size. It dates from around 300 BC, so long before the Incas came along and tarted it up. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of our adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Word Banker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to Trujillo, Huanchaco, Chiclayo, Chapari, and San Lorenzo Island.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.